I'm letting y'all know now this video is rated TVMAL and contains strong language and is intended for mature audiences.
My name Kay-9 and I love eating booty burgers. They transferred me to Smith State Prison and I met this lil clown named Evil Folks. Everybody's supposed to be scared of him, but this Kay-9, I'm the most evil character in all these chain gang prison stories. And I'm letting y'all little YNs know, if you come to prison and they put you in my cell, I'm taking it away from you and you ain't getting your booty back.
Alright, you kids get to bed, I get the storybook.
Welcome to another fire audio story by G.K. David Movie Stories. The whole global gang and the Feezy fans know who them fools Kay-9 and Evil Folks is, so I ain't finna explain that. But I'm Lil JC and I now present to you. Evil Folks threw it on Kay-9. The hole at Smith State Prison was the kind of place where time didn't move forward. It rotted on the calendar. The segregation unit sat in the back of the compound like a concrete tumor growing out of the Georgia dirt. No grass, no trees, just sweating brick walls stacked in layers like somebody was trying to keep demons trapped inside. Inside the hole, every sound carried, from niggas farting to the sounds of lotion or Vaseline in a hand pumping meat. Metal doors slamming, food trays sliding through slots, inmates screaming at officers, or worse, the quiet. In cell 137 sat one of the most notorious inmates that had ever come through the Georgia Department of Corrections. Everyone knew him as Evil Folks, the same inmate who had become legendary from stories told on the Bill Feezy YouTube channel. Evil Folks was built like a ninth grader, only 5'7", 135 pounds soaking wet. His head was shaved bald, except for a crooked scar that ran from the back of his skull down to his neck, a souvenir from a gang war a few years earlier. He sat on his bunk reading a wrinkled paperback Bible someone had left behind when they transferred the last inmate out of the cell. But he wasn't reading. He was listening, because the hole at Smith State had a language, and Evil Folks spoke it fluently. He could tell which officer was walking the range just by the rhythm of their boots. He could tell which inmates were scared by how often they flushed their toilets. And he could tell when somebody dangerous had arrived, just by the silence that followed. That silence came at 2:14 p.m., one early afternoon. The metal doors down the hallway buzzed open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Evil Folks slowly closed his Bible. "Yeah," he muttered. Somebody knew. A moment later, the shouting started. "Move! Face the wall! Stop looking back!" The voice belonged to Sergeant Daniels, one of the few officers in the prison who didn't play the radio. Then Evil heard another voice, deep, calm, almost amused. "You ain't gotta push me, officer. I know where I'm going." Evil Folks grinned. "Oh yeah," he whispered. "That one trouble." The footsteps stopped right next to his cell's door. The steel door to the cell right next to his clanged open. A huge shadow stretched across the floor through the crack under the door. Then Sergeant Daniel spoke again. "Cell 156, welcome to Smith State Prison." The new inmate laughed. "Appreciate the hospitality, Sarge." The door slammed shut with a thunderous boom. A moment later, the cuffs came off. Keys rattled. Boots walked away. Then silence returned. Evil Folks leaned toward the air vent in his wall. "Yo." No answer. He waited a few minutes. Then the vent across the wall finally crackled. "Who that is?" Evil Folks grinned at being acknowledged. "They call me Evil Folks." The voice laughed. I'm Kay-9. Evil's smile disappeared. Even in prison. Some names travel faster than paperwork, and Kay-9 was one of them. Kay-9 had become infamous for being a booty bully and nightmare. He was known for one thing: sliming niggas. The man was 6'6" and built like a power forward, and he had a reputation for being one of the most unpredictable inmates in the Georgia chain gang. Fights, stabbings, extortion, rumors about things involving men's anuses and mouths being violated in the worst way. He had just been transferred from Hancock State Prison after allegedly putting his bunkmate in a coma during a 2-day grape session that left the inmate's white state boxers drenched in goozy brown poop and cherry red bloodstains. Evil folks leaned against the wall. So you finally made it to Smith. Kay-9 chuckled through the vent. Yeah, they said this where they send the real niggas. I ain't seen one yet. Well, Evil replied, you in the right place. For the next 2 days, the Rangers stayed quiet except for the normal noises you hear in the hole. Kay-9 mostly kept to himself. Occasionally, the two men would talk through the vent about prison politics, court cases, and the insanity of the Georgia prison system. But the real problem wasn't Kay-9. The real problem was his bunkmate, Lil Bando. Lil Bando was a 5'5" gangster disciple from Atlanta who had landed in the hole after a dorm fight over a contraband phone. He had been stuck in a hot cell with Kay-9, and the two of them barely fit inside the tiny 6x9-foot cage, especially during chow. Meals and segregation were miserable. Officers slid trays through the metal slot and inmates had to eat them sitting on their bunks. No tables, no chairs, just the smell of sweat, mildew, and recycled air. On the third day, everything exploded. It happened during dinner chow. Trays slid through the doors, plastic forks scraped against trays, and suddenly Lil Bando's voice erupted down the tier. Aye, bruh, Kay-9 answered calmly. What? You just fart, bruh? Silence. Then Kay-9 laughed. Yeah, Lil Bando snapped. Man, what the hell wrong with you? The walls in the hole were so thin every inmate could hear the argument, especially the one next door, Evil folks. Even though him and Lil Bando was both GD, they didn't talk much because they didn't click. Bando wasn't built like that, and Evil folks detected that with just a little bit of convo. Despite all of that, Evil folks was still loyal to his GD bro to an extent. When he heard Lil Bando yelling, he stepped up to his cell's door. What's going on, Bando? Lil Bando immediately shouted through the vent. This big, nasty-ass nigga keep farting in the cell. Kay-9 laughed again. You mad over a fart, little bitch? I'm trying to eat my tray. Fuck you talking about. Evil folks stepped closer to his vent. Aye, folks. Yeah. Evil folks' voice turned cold. Just chill. I got that big nigga. He yelled toward Kay-9. Aye, big boy, Kay-9 answered immediately. What bitch? You better hold them farts in while my folks eating his food. The bottom range went silent. Kay-9 leaned toward his vent. Or what you little bitch? Evil folks smiled. Or you gonna have problems when I see you nigga? Kay-9 laughed. Man, shut up. That was the moment the officer came back in and heard the commotion. Officer Ramirez, first shift. She hurried down the range. What is all this yelling? The inmates instantly quieted down, but evil folks kept talking. Officer? She stopped at his door. What? Big dude in the cell next door threatening my brother. Ramirez sighed and grabbed her radio. Control, call Sergeant Daniels to Seg. We got inmates arguing. 10 minutes later, the sergeant arrived. He walked down the range listening to the complaints. Lil Bando shouted from inside his cell, Sarge, this dude crazy. Kay-9 sat calmly on his bunk. Sergeant Daniels rubbed his forehead as he looked through the cell window. Okay, that's enough. Then he turned toward evil folks. You in here by yourself? Yes, Sarge. Yes, Sarge.
Can you please like and subscribe to the channel? I'll suck your...
Daniels nodded. Aight. I'll move that inmate in there with you tomorrow since y'all in the same organization. Lil Bando sighed in relief. Bet Sarge, evil folks nodded. Appreciate that. Daniels walked away, and the dorm went quiet again. But what nobody realized was that Sergeant Daniels forgot. His shift ended at 10 p.m., and he never processed the cell transfer, which meant Lil Bando stayed in the cell with Kay-9 that night. And in prison, nighttime is when the monsters come out. Nighttime in the segregation unit at Smith State Prison always felt different. During the day, there was movement, officers walking, radios crackling, trays sliding. But at night, the building turned into something else, something closer to a tomb. Lights stayed on 24 hours a day, but the yellow glow above the cells made everything feel half asleep. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor like dark fingers reaching through the bars. Around 11:30 p.m., most of the inmates in the dorm were laying on their bunks half asleep. Nobody in the whole ever slept fully. Evil sat on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He had learned long ago that the quiet hours between midnight and sunrise were the most dangerous time in prison. That was when grudges got settled. That was when desperation turned violent. And that was when the weak got preyed on. Through H the vent in his wall, he could hear faint movement next door. Kay-9 shifting around his cell. Metal creaking. Lil Bando coughing. Man, that sergeant should have moved that boy. Evil folks was awake too. He had been laying on his bunk staring at the wall ever since lights dimmed. The argument from earlier kept replaying in his head. Lil Bando was GD. That meant he was gang. In prison, gang ties mattered more than blood sometimes. Evil folks rolled onto his side and whispered toward the vent. "You good over there, Bando?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then Lil Bando's voice came through the vent quietly. "Yeah, straight, bruh." Kay-9 laughed softly in the background. That laugh irritated evil folks immediately. "You better watch." "Laugh, big boy," evil folks muttered. Kay-9 answered through the vent. "You still talking?" "Yeah. What you gonna do about it, bitch?" Evil folks smirked. "You gonna find out sooner or later." Kay-9 didn't respond. The dorm went quiet again, but the tension stayed in the air like electricity before a storm. 1:47 a.m. There was a sudden thud, and another. Evil folks sat upright immediately, half asleep. From the cell next door came the sound of a struggle. Lil Bando's muffled voice. Then Kay-9's deep growl. "Stop moving, lil bitch!" Metal rattled violently. Evil folks jumped off his bunk and pressed his ear against the wall. "Fuck y'all doing over there, Bando?" Response. Then Lil Bando's voice tried to scream, but it sounded muffled, like someone had shoved something in his mouth. "What the hell?" Another thud echoed through the walls. Then Kay-9's voice. "Told you to chill earlier." Evil folks rushed to his door. "What you doing over there, big boy?" No answer. Then he heard Lil Bando struggling again. The sound of a body slamming against the concrete. Evil folks' eyes widened. "Oh, hell nah." He started pounding on his cell door with both feet. Boom, boom, boom. "Officer." The hallway stayed silent. He hit the door harder. "Officer, somebody get down here." Inside the cell next door, Lil Bando was tied up on the floor. Kay-9 had used torn bedsheet strips to bind his wrists and ankles. A pair of filthy socks had been shoved into his mouth so deep he could barely breathe. Kay-9 stood over him like a giant shadow. "You shouldn't have disrespected me earlier." Lil Bando tried to scream, but the socks muffled everything. Kay-9 crouched down. "You thought your lil gang brother was gonna save you?" He laughed quietly. "Nah. 30 minutes of hell. Next door, evil folks kept pounding on his door. His fists were turning red from smashing the metal. Officer! Boom! 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 He yelled louder. Yo, this lame is doing something to my brother. But there was nothing he could do. Segregation cells were locked electronically. No inmate could open them. Evil folks slammed his shoulder into the door repeatedly. Open this door. Minutes dragged by. Kay-9 eventually stood up, breathing heavy, sweating profusely. You done? He wiped sweat off his forehead. Then he sat down calmly on his bunk like nothing had happened. Lil Bando lay on the floor, barely moving. 4:18 a.m. Finally, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Officer Jenkins appeared at the end of the range doing his security rounds. Evil folks immediately started screaming. Officer! Jenkins rushed over. What the hell wrong with you? Evil folks pointed toward the next cell. Check on my brother. Jenkins frowned. What brother? The lil one next door, motherfucker. Jenkins walked over slowly and looked through the window slot. Then his eyes widened. Oh, shit! Control! His radio crackled. Go ahead. We got an emergency in Seg. Call a code blue. Kay-9 stood calmly in the back of the cell as Jenkins shouted, Get on the ground. Kay-9 smiled. Why? Jenkins immediately sprayed pepper spray through the tray slot. A cloud of orange mist filled the tiny cell. Kay-9 stumbled back, coughing violently. More officers came running down the range. Within seconds, the entire hallway was chaos. Doors opened, handcuffs clanked. Lil Bando was dragged out bloody and unconscious with a bleeding butt. They rushed him toward medical. Kay-9 was dragged out next. His eyes were swollen shut from the pepper spray, but he still managed to laugh. You GD dudes soft. Evil folks watched from behind his door with fury burning in his eyes. You dead when I see you. Kay-9 smiled through burning eyes. We'll see. The next morning, Lil Bando never came back to the dorm. Word spread quickly that he had been taken from medical to an outside hospital because of internal injuries. The entire segregation unit buzzed with gossip. By noon the next day, Kay-9 had been placed back into his cell. Evil folks stood at his vent. You a coward. Kay-9 laughed. How? You tied him up. So? That ain't no fight. Kay-9 stretched out on his bunk. He disrespected me. Evil folks' voice turned icy. You violated GD. Kay-9 leaned toward the vent. Nigga, fuck GD. Silence filled the hallway. Then evil folks said quietly, You gonna pay for that. Kay-9 laughed. You ain't gonna do nothing. The next day was shower call. Segregation inmates only got showers 3 times a week. That morning, officers began escorting inmates one by one to the shower cages. Metal tray flaps clanged open and closed down the tier. Evil folks had been waiting all morning. He had filled a plastic mug with 2 days' worth of shit and piss, and he stood by his tray slot quietly. Officer Jenkins approached Kay-9's cell. Shower time. Kay-9 stepped out wearing handcuffs and shackles. As he walked past, evil folks' cell. Clang. Evil folks popped his tray flap open. Kay-9 turned his head. Splash. The entire mug of pissy fermented poop hit Kay-9 square in the face. The smelly goo slid down his shaved head and prison towel. The escort officer jumped back just time to avoid being hit. Hey! Kay-9 wiped his face slowly. Then he stared directly into evil folks' cell. Evil folks grinned. That was just the beginning.
This here's Lieutenant Huckleberry. I done had encounters with both of the 1095s in this here documentary or whatever it is. The lil one, what's his name? Evil Yoke or something like that. Back when I was a CO2, I had to lock his ass up for cutting a boy's pecker off for pissing all over the commode in their cell. He said he got tired of the smell. And the big one, I forget his name, I think it was Tekashi 6ix9ine or something. He had one of them girly men that was in love with him, and when he went to seg for beating some boy up, the girly man was crying a river. She was so deep in lust that he filled out a medical request to get a colonoscopy just so he could get some action back there until his big bully of a boyfriend got out the hole because he knew that 6'9" feller would have beat his feet if he cheated on him with another inmate.
Man, that Glock dookie wasn't for you. Doesn't matter. Jenkins scribbled something on the paper. You getting 30 more days in the hole. He slid the disciplinary ticket through the tray slot. As Jenkins walked away down the range, evil folks leaned toward the vent. 2 days later, word traveled fast through the prison grapevine. By the second afternoon, rumors had already spread across Smith State Prison. Kay-9 was being released from segregation. Officer radios crackled outside the dorm. Doors buzzed. Handcuffs clicked. Evil folks watched through his scratched-up cell window as officers opened the Booty Beast cell. Kay-9 stepped out calmly. No anger, no shouting, just the same quiet grin. Officer Jenkins escorted him down the hallway. You going to H1, Jenkins said. Kay-9 shrugged. Cool with me. As he passed evil folks' door, he slowed down. The two men stared at each other through the narrow plexiglass window. Evil folks tapped the door twice. Tick-tock, big boy. Kay-9 smiled wider. We'll see, little bitch. Then he disappeared down the range. Evil folks stepped up on his shit jacket. That's what they call the toilet in the chain gang. Don't ask me why, he yelled through the air vent above the toilet. Blue Devil! He yelled to a dark-skinned, 5'11" crip in the cell directly above him. Yeah. What's up, cuz? Blue Devil replied, knowing evil from the compound. I need you to call a number for me and send a message to my bros out there. I got a couple of soups down here. Evil finished basically just asking the crip to make a call for him on his contraband cell phone to his fellow gangster disciple brothers. Evil folks' voice turned serious. Tell him that nigga, Kay-9, touched one of the bros back here and it's a green light on him. Blue Devil knew exactly what that meant. In prison language, that green light meant somebody was finna get their ass put on a helicopter or worse. And once that call was made, there was no stopping it. The next day out on the big yard at Smith, several dorms were let out at the same time. The yard was spacious, with a wide open field surrounded by tall fences topped with razor wire. Inmates walked laps, lifted makeshift weights, played basketball and soccer, or just stood in groups talking. Every prison yard had invisible lines, Bloods on this side, Crips on that side, the essays over there. The gangster disciples over here and so on, civilians scattered in between. That afternoon, the yard had almost 200 inmates outside. The gate opened. A small group of inmates walked out under officer supervision. Among them was Kay-9. He stepped onto the yard slowly, stretching his arms. Fresh air. Imagine freedom. After 21 days in the hole, it felt good. Some inmates recognized him immediately due to his huge body. They transferred that nigga here. Dude from Hancock? Yeah, I heard about him. Kay-9 walked toward the pull-up bars. He didn't notice the eyes watching him from across the yard. A group of GDs standing near the basketball court. One of them was a tall inmate from Columbus, Georgia named Dre Moe, 6'4.5", almost as tall as Kay-9. He and all of his bros out there had gotten evil folks' message yesterday. The message was simple. Kay-9 violated a GD, and when that kind of word came down, it had to be handled. Dre Moe counted the brothers standing around him. 1, 2, 3, more walking over. By the time Kay-9 finished his first set of pull-ups, there were 19 GDs slowly moving across the yard. Kay-9 dropped from the pull-up bar. He sensed something before he even turned around. Footsteps, lots of them. When he turned, he saw the circle forming. 19 gangsters closing in. One of them spoke. Bitch ass nigga, you touch one of the bros? Kay-9 wiped sweat from his hands. Yeah, bitch! That hole was tight back there, too. The first 5 punches came from the left in front, 4 more from the right. Then the entire group rushed him at once. The yard exploded into chaos. Inmates started shouting, fight, oh snap. Kay-9 swung wildly, knocking one small GD down with a powerful hook, but 19 attackers was too many. They piled onto him like a wave, fists flying, blicky swinging, kicks landing, feet stomping. Kay-9 tried to fight back, roaring as he shoved 2 attackers away, but more kept coming. Within seconds, he disappeared under a swarm of G's. Across the yard, the officer grabbed his radio. Code 1022 on the yard. Officers rushed out of nearby buildings carrying pepper spray and tasers. Get down, get down. Pepper spray clouds filled the air. The attackers scattered in different directions. Kay-9 lay on the ground, barely moving in a puddle of his own blood. The red stuff poured from a cut above his eye. 2 officers flipped him over. Is he breathing? Kay-9 groaned weakly. Yeah. They dragged him toward the medical building as the yard was forced to the ground. Every inmate laid, face down in the dirt, while officers regained control. Back in the hole later that evening, news reached segregation. Several inmates heard it first from an officer talking near the desk. Big dude got jumped by like 20 GDs. Evil folks leaned toward his cell door to hear better. Yo, evil folks. What? You got mo, get back, folks. Evil folks sat down slowly on his bunk. What happened? Kay-9 got pulled out on the yard by yo people. Evil folks smiled slowly. For a moment, evil folks said nothing. Then he leaned back on his pillow, told his ass. Evil folks stared at the ceiling calmly. That ain't even the end of it. Kay-9 still breathing. And in evil folks' warped mind, that meant the war wasn't over.
On Kay-9, laugh in the dark, why they cross that line? Bloody red mud on the chrome on the shine. Evil folks do shit on Kay-9. You were walking that block, just mine on this grind. Chain tucked in, hoodie low, trying to slide, trying to hide. Heard him snicker from the shadows, saw the stains on his pride. Turned that hurt to a curse, now they first on his mind. On his mind, do shit on Kay-9. Laugh in the dark, why they cross that line? Bloody red mud on the chrome on the shine. Evil folks do shit on Kay-9.